alive on the Mounjaro. It's on the pen alive with your host David Knapp.
Thank you, Claptrack, and happy Thursday night. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man of the Mounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Mounjaro, Zepbound, Compound, that pen. It's what we talk about each and every week here at OTP. Hey, did y'all catch out that interview yesterday? That interview with Lee Rosebush, the chairman and founder of the Outsourcing Facilities Association, leading the charge against the FDA, Eli Lilly, and Novo Nordisk in the shortages of GLP-1 medications. That was a fantastic interview. If you missed it, don't miss out. You have got to go check that interview out. What a powerful and informative interview that was. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed that video. But how are you doing tonight? You may be able to tell, for those of you keen observers, that the sun is out. And this is a show that happens at 9 o'clock Central on Thursday night. So why is the sun out? Well, we were pre-recording this. I'm actually feeling a little under the weather. I don't know if you could hear it in my voice at all, but I'm definitely fighting a little something, and my wife is too. Funny how that works. So I am pre-recording this afternoon so that we can sort of have an easier evening of rest for the family. So thanks for bearing with me, and thanks for hanging out. So we're going to get right into it. We've got a great show tonight. We've got Dr. Steve Silvestro. He is the medical communicator, content creation communicator for Ro. Ro, as you know, is our telehealth partner. I am an advisor for Ro. And we help sort of bring ideas from the community to Ro in terms of what they could offer for tools for the community. Of course, they have a wonderful checker tool where you can go literally just punch your insurance card in, and they'll tell you what medicines for obesity you are going to be approved for by your insurance company. They also have the shortage reporting tool where you can report the shortage, as we learned from Lee from the outsourcing facilities yesterday. That is still very important, compelling information that they are using to present in the lawsuit against the FDA for ending the shortages. So amazing tools that Ro offers. And of course, their Ro Body program, where patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year. We've talked about that often on this show. People are often more successful. They've done some studies on this, more successful on the Ro Body program than people were generally in the clinical trials for these medications, because when you couple lifestyle modifications and all the great tools and resources that the Ro Body program offers, people tend to see more success. So we love Ro, and we love Dr. Silvestro, and we're going to have a great conversation tonight about stalls, about dealing with side effects, just a really interesting conversation. So I know you'll enjoy it, but we're going to get to the fun stuff first. One of the great things that we do every week is we give a little nugget for those of you who are in maintenance, because that is an ever increasing number of you. And Corey brings the straight fire every week for those who are on maintenance, as far as just ways to navigate the different troubles and issues that come along with being in maintenance. So let's hear this week's maintenance minute from our friend Corey.
Hey, I'm Corey. You know, one of the interesting things about making changes to your health, especially when it leads to visible weight loss, is how much people feel entitled to comment on it. Some mean well, but others can be nosy, judgmental, or just unaware that not everyone wants to discuss their body. If you're on a GLP-1 like Zepbound for maintenance and want to keep that journey private, it's completely valid. Your health decisions are yours alone, and you don't owe anyone an explanation. The key to keeping things private is controlling the narrative, or choosing not to have one at all. If someone comments on your appearance, a simple "thanks, I've been focusing on my health" is usually enough. If they push something vague like "I've made some changes that work for me," keeps things neutral. You don't have to explain more than you're comfortable with. Now, if you lost weight fairly gradually, people may not even register the change all at once. But if it was more noticeable in a short period, you might get reactions. The best approach? Decide ahead of time how you want to handle them. If you don't want to discuss it, a lighthearted, "Oh, I don't really focus on that," can move the conversation along. As for medication privacy, most people don't go around explaining every prescription they take, and GLP-1s don't have to be any different. If someone sees you taking an injection or finds out, you can simply say, "It's for something my doctor is monitoring." That's usually enough to stop further questions. Social situations can be another challenge. Maybe your appetite is different, or alcohol affects you more. If people notice, you can say, "I just don't eat as much as I used to," or "I'm listening to my body more." No need for a big explanation. One thing to be prepared for is how other people react. Sometimes weight loss brings out unexpected emotions, jealousy, insecurity, or even resentment. But here's the thing, their reaction is about them, not you. If someone seems hurt that you didn't share, you can gently say, "This was something I needed to do privately, but I appreciate your support." But if someone keeps pushing past your boundaries, turn it back on them. Ask, "Why do you want to know? My health information is private." This flips the script and makes them reflect on their own curiosity. Most people will back off when they realize you're not going to engage. At the end of the day, setting boundaries isn't rude. It's an act of self-care. You don't owe anyone access to your personal health journey. If someone is persistent, but firm but polite, "I'd rather not talk about it," works just fine. The bottom line, your health, your choices, your business, period. And that is your Maintenance Minute.
A really good word from our friend Corey this week. And of course, that makes a lot of sense, not only to people who are in maintenance, but this really applies to anyone who is on a GLP-1. Not everyone is super comfortable talking about the medications that they're on. It doesn't matter what medication they're on. Some people are just more private. And it is interesting how often people feel brazen enough to ask you such deeply personal questions. And so I think it's just a great reminder that we can protect our own peace and set our own boundaries. And it's important to sort of think through those ahead of times, especially when you're entering into social situations where those things are just likely to come up. So really great practical information from Corey each and every week, but some exceptional stuff this week. Thank you, Corey. I want to give you just a little bit of housekeeping this week because there is something exciting I wanted to tell y'all about.
Housekeeping.
You want it for pillow? Housekeeping. Check this out, friends. This is amazing. I had the wonderful pleasure of being on Dr. Tina's podcast, the Dr. Tina Show. I am so super excited about this. This episode just dropped. I hope you could hear me while that was laying over my image. I think that you could. But this episode just dropped today. I did literally like an hour and a half long interview with Dr. Tina on her podcast. It was such a pleasure to be over there on that. And I hope that you'll all go over and check that episode out and give it some love here on YouTube. That's Dr. Tina Moore. You can just do a search for her in the search bar and find that. I'll link it in the description of this video too. She was actually on OTP a couple weeks ago. So we had her over here. I was over there. I really hope you'll check that both of those shows out if you haven't checked them out. It's really great content. And I know that you'll appreciate that. The guests on this show, the caliber of guests on the show just keep getting more amazing. And I'm just so thankful for people like Dr. Tina who have allowed me to come onto her show as well. So a little bit of housekeeping. Let's keep this rolling though, because our friend Allie has of course prepared something wonderful for us this week again, as we check out this week's Reddit recap. Reddit recap.
Blinded by the light. Okay, I've got a great story for you today from Reddit, and I'm gonna read part of it to you because it was just so validating You'll see what I mean. So, former athlete to fat people, I was wrong. I've been an athlete my whole life. I thought that fat people were fat because they lacked willpower, they were lazy, and they didn't learn what healthy foods were as a child. Then I got insomnia from a metabolic disorder. I gained 61 pounds in 2 months. No matter what I did, I couldn't lose weight. My doctor put me on a GLP-1, and not only was I able to get my sleep back under control, but I was able to lose the weight that I had gained. Too often on Reddit, we are caught up in being right or winning the fight. But I think it's more important to stop and admit when you are wrong. I was wrong. And it took walking in somebody else's shoes to show me exactly how wrong I was. So this one, man, it really got me, because I feel like there are so many people that are influenced by media propaganda, that are influenced by what others are saying, even doctors who are woefully uneducated on the phenomenal benefits of these GLP-1 meds. So to read this story, I thought, if only a story like this could go viral and really just get it in people's heads so that they would take a step back and think, I had never really thought of it like that. And I think that for most of us in the GLP-1 community, we're not expecting people to bend over backward for us, but a little bit of compassion, a little bit of understanding, it goes a long way. This is Allie signing off on your Reddit recap.
Amazing. An amazing Reddit recap. Sorry for the bouncing around of the video. StreamYard has changed some things and things aren't showing up exactly the way they normally do, but amazing. Just to think about, that come to Jesus moment that somebody has when they have not experienced or walked a mile in somebody's shoes before, and they sort of have a different perspective on the world. And then suddenly they're thrust into a situation where they're experiencing something they've never experienced before. And then lo and behold, wow, this is not what I thought it was. So I agree, Allie, those are the stories that need to be told, and a perfect story to be highlighting here at OTP. And hopefully there are more and more stories like that as we see people continuing to benefit from these GLP-1 medications and coming to the light on what it means to live with metabolic disease and the fact that it's not your fault, right? Amazing. So good word from our friend Allie. Thank you, Allie, who's now doing some lives on her YouTube channel. I don't know if you caught that last night, Allie. Allie G was live. She was doing her thing. Love it. If you love Allie in her videos, you're going to love Allie live, because Allie is one of those rare people where what you see is what you get. You get Allie unfiltered, whether you're watching her videos or whether you're watching her live. So I hope you'll go over and check that out. I mean, I'm sure you all have by now, but at Fit Flavor Fun, and then Corey at Corey.take2 on TikTok. So thank you, ladies. Awesome. Just bringing the good stuff each and every week. I appreciate both of you so much. And I know the community does too. So thank you. We've got a great interview here. Y'all ready for it? Can't wait to bring you this week's Hot Channel, Dr. Steve Silvestro. Just a really great conversation with Dr. Steve this week. I know you're going to enjoy it. Let's talk this week's Hot Channel, Dr. Steve Silvestro.
Hot Channel.
Friends of OTP, another exciting conversation for those of you interested in the world of GLP-1s from the perspective of a physician who is dealing with patients who are using these medications to combat metabolic disorder, to fight against obesity. We've got a really great guest today, and I'm excited to chat with him, and I know that you'll enjoy the conversation with Dr. Steve Silvestro. Dr. Steve is a content and education provider for Ro, which, as you all know, is a telemedicine company that On the Pen advises for, and we work with very closely. They've got their Row Body program that helps patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year. Even some interesting data that came out recently from a study Row put together that showed that patients on Ozempic or Wegovy lost 15.8% of their body weight in a 52-week study, which actually even exceeds what we've seen in some of the clinical trials. So the Row Body program is amazing. And Dr. Steve is one of those people who is constantly giving input to Row on how to tweak and perfect that program. So we are excited to introduce into the channel tonight, Dr. Steve Silvestro. Dr. Steve, welcome to OTP.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. These are some of my favorite conversations, Dr. Steve, when I get to talk to medical professionals who are out there sort of living in the world of prescribing GLP-1 medications, because you have such a unique insight into, we talk a lot about clinical trials and trial data and all that stuff here at OTP, but how things actually translate to the real world is what I think people are really interested in hearing from. So why don't you give us a little bit of background about how you got into treating obesity and how you got connected with Row and sort of how your passion has developed towards patients living with obesity.
Yeah, sure. So I am originally a pediatrician by training. I spent 11 years in practice in a primary care clinic as a pediatrician. I have continued for about 16 years, perform bone marrow collections one morning a week when people donate for a transplant. And when I was a pediatrician, I had kids around the same time that I started practice. So I was right there with parents, and I started to really see there's a lot of anxiety and fear in raising kids nowadays. And a lot of that has to do with the types of information that we get online. So I really started to dedicate myself toward healthcare communication. I started a podcast, which I ran for a number of years, YouTube channel, social media, website, the whole shebang. Started to write a book, never happened. And that really became a focus of mine, was helping people better understand our health. I'm a big believer in the idea that if you can more fully understand your health and the things that impact your health, you have much more ownership and power over changing it for the better. So at some point I decided that I really wanted to make healthcare communication my primary focus. And that's when I came across Row several years back, and I joined on. And that was right before we started our metabolic health offering, GLP-1s. And so it was really a perfect confluence, because it really struck a chord with me, because overweight and obesity have been something that I have observed and been really touched by through a number of loved ones in my life. When I was in practice, I treated many kids, teens, young adults with overweight and obesity and all the things that go along with them. But it was really especially what I saw with loved ones that really got me most excited about working with Row in this capacity. My mom, my aunt, a lot of people in my life have dealt with overweight and obesity throughout their lives. My grandmother used to work for one of those companies that would send you prepackaged meals, both as a patient and also as a nurse. So we have old ads of her from the 1980s doing the whole jeans thing. Like, this is my old jeans. Yeah. And then we have other ads of her as a nurse. And it said, Constance Pico treats this person in the, the brick and mortar clinic. So it's something that I've seen for a long time. My wife, for a number of years, worked for a nonprofit that created a curriculum to teach tweens about nutrition, exercise, and body image, but most especially about media literacy, to understand how things that we see in the media influence our own sense of self and how we feel about weight and nutrition. And so all these things really sort of combined to get me really excited about doing what I do at Row. And I should clarify, I don't actually treat patients through Row, but I did, along that journey, get board certified in obesity medicine, and I am responsible for the educational components for patients and also the general public, to help folks really get a good understanding of what's going on and how these medications work, what they can do, and help people get the most out of their treatment.
Yeah, amazing. It's hard to imagine anybody who hasn't been touched in their personal life by someone that they love living with the disease of obesity or the struggle with overweight. And I can imagine that it's been quite an enjoyable thing for you to watch sort of the evolution of the treatments evolve from those disgusting prepackaged meals and the images of somebody holding up their pants and you know all that stuff to where we are today, where the discussion allows for a little bit more nuance, and there's actually treatments, medical treatments that are addressing some of the underlying metabolic dysfunction that leads to those issues. So that's very encouraging to always hear stories of folks who have kind of been part of that, you know, on the front lines of the evolution of all that. Tell me a little bit about, because this is a huge topic of conversation within the community, when you talk about treating pediatrics with living with obesity. What do you attribute sort of the rise in obesity, overweight, and metabolic dysfunction, especially within the pediatric community? What's different today than 25 years ago, than 40 years ago?
The biggest thing that we really see is that the types of food that we've seen evolve over the last several decades has really started to have such a dearth of nutritional quality, yet a boost in calories, and also a lot of compounds that really target the systems, that take advantage of the systems that we have that make us crave more. And so that's a huge factor for kids and for adults, is that the types of foods that we have available to us aren't always as nutritionally sound, especially when we get to certain price points. You know, I think that for the average person, it's expensive to eat healthy. And so there are a number of factors that are socioeconomic, that are sort of institutional in terms of the types of foods that we have available. And then also, like I said earlier, you know, we do, as we've become more connected through the internet and through technology, we have seen that we are less physically connected. And so neighborhoods are often less walkable, less bikeable. I have kids, I have teenagers, and they don't necessarily go to a friend's house. You know, we used to say to them in the summer, like, why don't you just walk over or ride your bike to your friend's house and then see if they want to hang out? And they're like, no, Mom, it doesn't work that way. Dad, it doesn't work that way. I have to text them first, you know, and figure that out. And so they end up at home socializing over online and not getting out and doing things together. Yeah. So a whole bunch of reasons, sort of stammered there for a moment, just because it's hard to pinpoint one.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of factors that are at play, especially when we look at this as a macro system over the last 50, 60 years.
Yeah, I think this is getting a little deep for what I normally talk about, but I think as I've continued to have this conversation with different, especially medical providers, obesity specialists, or nutritionists, I think what I have sort of boiled it down to, and I try to be very cognizant of this as a father as well, I live with obesity. Type 2 diabetes and obesity run rampant on both sides of my family. So being keenly aware that these are issues that my children may very well face in the future, trying to, you know, sort of shepherd them well through life in all aspects, but especially as it relates to their health and physical activity. And one of the things that I think you could boil a lot of this stuff down to, Dr. Steve, is we've exchanged natural things for less natural things. And what I mean by that is you talk about the food, right? So we've exchanged, you know, a piece of fruit for a fruit snack. We've exchanged, oftentimes, you know, vegetables for, you know, I know oftentimes I can fall into this trap, like veggie straws, or you know, it's just highly processed versions of things that you know used to be consumed in a more natural state. You can just like expand that out even beyond the food that we eat, when we're talking about social connections, right? We've exchanged riding our bike to the neighbor's house to this sort of plasticized version of connection. And there's nothing wrong with this. This community is a great piece, a lot of value that can be obtained there. But when we exchange it for those interpersonal connections, there's wide-ranging impacts. And I think if you can boil a lot of this stuff down just to, we've just traded off convenience, and in doing so, accepted more unnatural things in our diet. We get because we're in front of screens, many of us, kids obviously, video games, adults more so. I find myself sitting behind a desk for 8 hours a day and not moving. So we trade that, normal movement that people used to get from their jobs with treadmill time,
Right.
which seems like punishment. It doesn't seem like punishment to go out and play with my kids and move around that way. But if I'm going to get on a treadmill, it's sort of this unnatural thing that feels like punishment. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's sort of like how I tend to boil it down in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. And you mentioned like fruit snacks and veggie straws. And I think part of the other thing that is not always discussed broadly in a lot of circles is how these things are sold to us. And what I mean by that is that your fruit snack probably says contains real fruit or made with real fruit. And there are going to be many, many, many people who will see that and say, oh, this is probably healthier than the one that says it doesn't contain real fruit.
Mm-hmm.
When the reality may be that it might be a fraction of a percent of fruit juice, which is the least useful part of the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Veggie straws, right? Well, at least it's a vegetable, right? And that's kind of the idea. I mean, we had veggie straws when my kids were little in the house all the time. When in reality, it's a different type of potato chip, And so I think that, yeah, a host of things, like you said, where we've sort of traded. This makes me sound old.
Don't worry about it.
Traded real experiences. We've traded real experiences that our bodies were built for. Right? We've traded those for, like you said, sort of less real experiences. This is sort of veering off topic a bit, but when I was in practice, I would have a lot of parents would say, my young boy is acting out in school. He's acting out rubber, and there can be many, many reasons for that. But then we go through their day, and he's not really getting all that much physical activity. He's sitting still in class for X number of hours. Their recess is getting shorter and shorter. When in reality, that little body is built to be training to run around and hunt things and carry it back to camp, right? Like all these things that our bodies are built for, we're no longer allowing them to do at the degree or the frequency that our bodies are still expecting. And so we've essentially sort of come back to the original question. I think one of the reasons that we see that overweight and obesity are as common as they are right now is that we've changed our behaviors, we've evolved our behavior without evolution of our bodies. And the new behaviors and the new environments in which we live. That environment includes the foods that we have and our work situations. Those are not built to really serve the bodies that we have.
That makes all the sense in the world in terms of how our bodies could adapt over such a short amount of time from such a shift in less physical activity and less whole natural sort of nutrients that our bodies have been used to for thousands of years. So it makes a lot of sense to me. I think it sort of bleeds naturally into the conversation of you tend to, everything gets so polarizingly split in this country, and it's hard to have any conversation with any nuance because people tend to just get in their corners. But you sort of have this movement of Make America Healthy Again, which is like, we got to get the dyes out of our food. We've got more so from the elements, like kind of like we've talked about, like just more natural approach to health, which I think is one side of it, right? But I think what gets lost in this whole debate is the reality is now we have a generation of children, we have a generation of adults whose bodies have been ravaged by metabolic disease, disorder, dysfunction, however you want to couch it, because, partly the things that we've talked about. But what gets lost is like, what do we do to treat these people, right? And so in the greater conversation that society is having, I think so much education needs to take place, which is why I appreciate somebody like you who has dedicated, part of your professional life to that piece, that educational piece. How are GLP-1s changing the game for those people who, like I said, are already metabolically sick?
In huge ways. So anyone who has tried to lose weight in the past has likely gone through the experience of potentially losing some weight and eventually hitting a plateau and then gaining it back. And this is, to come back to how our bodies are built. We are essentially built to maintain a weight. If you think of us as cave people, the cave person is going to live in a time of famine at various times. Food is not always going to be available. And so our body is built essentially to help us through those times when food is not available. And it does that by hanging on to body weight so we can use that weight as energy to feed our muscles, our brain, our heart, the important things. Now, most folks in industrialized countries don't live through those times when food's not available. And so our bodies, however, are still sort of geared toward that fear of losing weight. If you think of it as a bungee cord. And I've never been bungee jumping. Have you been bungee jumping?
No. It's sort of like the fat man's natural enemy.
But I've seen videos, right?
Right.
And if you watch a video of bungee jumping, the bungee cord is attached to the bridge. When someone first takes that dive, there's slack in the cord. And then as they get down towards the bottom, now that cord is lengthened out through resistance, pulling it back up towards the top of the bridge. Okay. The body has a whole host of hormones. Some of the more commonly discussed ones are ghrelin, which I think of as making you hungry because it's like grr. Leptin helps you lose weight. Peptide YY, a whole host of them. And what happens as we lose weight, when you first start to try and lose weight, it's sort of at that point in the bungee jump when your cord is slacked. There's not a whole lot of resistance pulling you back up. And so it's easy to lose a couple of pounds. As you get down towards the bottom of that jump, now you're starting to see that your hormones are shifting to pull you back up towards that weight you started off at the top of the bridge. Ghrelin starts to increase, leptin starts to go down, so you feel hungrier. What GLP-1s do is they essentially lower the bridge so that now it's like your set point, your body is not trying to get you back to a weight that is way up here. Now your body is saying, oh, okay, this weight down here is maybe what I should be revolving around. And so now what GLP-1s allow you to do is have that slack in your bungee cord for a lot longer and get you down towards a much lower weight before you start to feel any sort of resistance. And as you start to get up in doses, you may start to feel there's not much resistance at all because you have enough of the medication in your system that it's essentially binding with enough receptors and influencing that neighborhood of other hormones that manage cravings and hunger in such a way that you're not feeling this pull to get back up towards your old weight. Without GLP-1s, it's very, very difficult to lose the amount of body weight that we're seeing that people can lose with the GLP-1. And so it's more than just the numbers too, right? We start to see that there are all kinds of impacts on other health factors, liver disease, PCOS, sleep apnea, heart disease, a whole number of things that improve as we start to reach these levels of weight loss that people often have a very hard time reaching without GLP-1s. So very long answer to say that they're having a huge impact on both the amount of body weight that folks are able to lose, but especially the sorts of health impacts and health changes that people see as time goes on.
Absolutely. I love the analogy. I've never heard it quite put that way. And so it painted a really, really interesting picture of just that resistance, that tendency of your body to pull you back to where you were, and in the hormone changes that are happening to sort of cause that. Very interesting stuff, which is why we get a lot into the future of these medications, because what we hear a lot, Dr. Stephen, maybe you can speak to this, is there's a lot of people, not a majority by any stretch, but there are a lot of people who do get to those high doses of semaglutide or those high doses of tirzepatide, and perhaps it's because they started at a much higher BMI, or for whatever the reasons are sort of stalled out on what the medicine seems to be able to give them at the high dose. What do you say, or what kind of advice do you give to that person who maybe is experiencing the resistance and they've got all the medicine in them that is available to them? What other things can be done?
So the first thing that I would say is to not fret, to not take it, not feel like it's a failure of your own in any sort of way. If you look at the clinical trials for most of these medications, we see that there is an average curve that most folks will follow. And so it's very understandable if you are following close to that average curve. And what that means is that, let's say tirzepatide, you as an average person are likely to lose about 20% over the course of a year. 72 weeks is the full length of the trials. And so as you approach that number, that's a common experience. It's not super expected that you may get much more than that. Now, other folks may actually experience their plateau at some point that isn't reaching that average number. In either instance, the first thing to do is to reach out to your provider, because there may be additional things that can be done in the GLP-1 space. So if you are on something like liraglutide or semaglutide, your provider might want to switch you to tirzepatide, because you see a higher average weight loss with tirzepatide. If you are already at the maximum dose of the GLP-1 that you and your provider think is best for you, there are options to add in other medications. There are non-GLP-1s. There are also things that can be looked at in terms of other things that you can do with your behaviors and your activities. So, for example, exercise. We focus a lot, once we get towards a maintenance stage, or as we get into plateau stages, on resistance training and strength building. Because we know that as you lose weight, muscle is lost in that process too. That happens with any type of weight loss. We do see it with GLP-1s as well. The studies are all over the map. Some trials will show about 15% of the body weight that's lost is muscle. We've seen there's a trial that says as much as 40 to 60%, which is pretty high. And the differences there are primarily due to the types of exercises or the presence of exercise in that person's behaviors as they take their GLP-1. So as you start to plateau, what is often recommended is to really focus in on strength building and muscle building. Muscle has a higher metabolic rate than fat tissue does. So as you are able to build more muscle, you might see that the number on the scale stays about the same or maybe even goes up because muscle weighs more than fat tissue does. But if you can build more muscle, your body naturally burns more calories at rest. And that shift, as you build more muscle, if you're in a plateau phase, can sometimes break you through that plateau a little bit to add a couple of percentage points on to your weight loss. And so oftentimes things that are recommended, certainly strength building, resistance training, but especially focusing on the legs and the back. The legs and the back are the biggest muscles in the body. And so if you can activate those, you tend to activate a higher bump in your metabolic rate at baseline. You also, some people experience an increase in naturally circulating growth hormone, which makes it easier for other muscles to grow with your exercise. So focusing on strength training, especially legs and back, is one way to really help to sort of shift through a plateau. The other things at that point, sometimes it's a matter of changing your mindset in a good way. If you are at a plateau and it's very early, you're not reaching the weight loss that you might expect, that you and your provider expect based on your history and what the average weight loss with that medication often is. That's a different thing. And that's where you have the conversation to figure out, is this the right dose, the right medication, the right approach? If you've gotten to a point where you've met what you and your provider decided might be your goal weight, or what you think is the average weight loss, sometimes at that point, it's helpful now to start to focus on other things. Start to focus on things like, how are my lab markers looking? Are there shifts that I can make there? Is my cholesterol still high? We know GLP-1s can help to lower cholesterol, but is it still high? If so, if I'm satisfied with my weight now, what can I do to change up my diet? Maybe that can impact the cholesterol. Sometimes it's also a shift of mindset now of, let me stop thinking about continuing to lose and now think about maintaining this weight loss. And that is certainly where developing muscle helps, but also where giving yourself some leeway can be useful. So when you're in a stage of trying to lose weight, oftentimes, the mentality and the excitement is very focused around continuing to see the numbers decline. And anytime there's any shift upward, which is a really common experience, it can be really disheartening. Once you get to a plateau stage, and if we're going to say this plateau is now a maintenance stage, sometimes it's helpful to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room to now say, I'm going to maintain a body weight that is within about 5 pounds of this weight for X amount of time. We talk a lot about SMART goals being specific and measurable. So it's going to be about 5 pounds of this weight for the next 6 months. And that can be a motivating factor to keep going with all the lifestyle changes to help maintain there. Sometimes it's also a matter of figuring out and deciding, there are things that I am going to allow myself to entertain and enjoy. So yesterday I got a text from a friend who just got back from a vacation in Paris, and he's on Zepbound. He's doing really well. He's in the maintenance stage. And he sent a whole bunch of pictures, and most of the pictures were of tables of the most glorious food. And he said, I didn't ask, he said, you know what? I decided to pause my Zepbound the week before the trip because I wanted to go and eat like a king. And certainly stopping medication, pausing medication is something you should speak with a provider about, because especially if you pause for too long, you might have to change your dose because your body is no longer used to that high dose. If you go right back, you might have some side effects. But what I really appreciated about him saying that was that's a maintenance stage mentality. That is, because again, like when he was still trying to actively get down and lose a whole lot of weight. That was his goal, was seeing the numbers change and seeing his body change and the feelings that he had as that occurred. And now that he's at a place where he wants to be, he's starting to find a lot more balance in just what he does with his everyday life, while still maintaining his treatment and maintaining the overall goals that he's had.
Amazing. There's a couple things, a lot of really great stuff in there, and a couple things that I just want to kind of revisit because I think there's a lot of people listening to this advice and probably taking notes, and I can try this, I can try that, or maybe I've tried this and it didn't work for me. I want to talk about the physical movement. So you specifically highlighted some of the easier places to build muscle, the legs and the back, as those are the largest muscles that you have in your body. One of the things we do some community live panels where it'll just be a panel of like 6 or 8 people who are on these medications. One of the things that we hear constantly is oftentimes the biggest barrier to starting some sort of, let's for this conversation purpose, starting a new exercise regimen or muscle building regimen is they get stopped by the start. In other words, the barrier to starting is, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. Oftentimes, especially with muscle building, it feels like you need to go from sitting on the couch to Olympic weightlifting, which is certainly not the case, but that's sort of the mentality. And that's where people let the start stop them. What would some practical advice be for somebody who is just looking to, okay, I need to maybe build some more muscle. I'm going to focus on my legs and my back. What are some easy things that somebody can do to start today, very small steps that can help get them on that path and get over that hurdle of the start?
Yeah, think small. I mean, really, like you sort of mentioned, getting off the couch, literally sit on the couch and stand up, and sit and stand up, and think of that as an exercise. Do that 10 times, 15 times, take a break for several minutes, come back and do it again, right? It's something that you're doing anyway, and you know that you are able to do it. But if you shift that into to adapting it to be a type of exercise, that doesn't seem quite so so challenging, right? So intimidating. You hear all the time about things like taking the stairs, parking farther away in a parking lot. You know, small steps first, but the key, sort of what I mentioned a moment or two ago, was this idea of a SMART goal. What's often really intimidating at the start is, besides that you think, weightlifting needs to be giant Olympic barbells. What's often really intimidating is that our common approach to setting goals is to be really broad. I need to exercise more. I need to lift weights. I need to start trying to run. Those don't necessarily mean anything, because you can't decide that on a Sunday and then come back the next Sunday and have a great gauge of how well you did. And so what's often recommended when you're first starting out is what's called a SMART goal. You be specific. So I am going to, let's use the couch standing example. I'm going to do 5 sets of standing up off the couch 5 times every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Right? Very specific. It's measurable because we decided exactly how much to do. It's achievable. Okay, that's the A in SMART. It's something that your body is able to do. It's relevant. It's the R of SMART. All right, it's relevant. It has a function in your goal. You're trying to build muscle in your weight loss journey. And the T is timely. So we know exactly what time we're going to do it. So that's something to really focus on when you're first starting to try, is not to look at the ultimate end goal, and also not to think in terms of really big picture goals, but to be really super simple and specific, and set that type of SMART goal.
Yeah, I like the idea of, most people are used to the idea of SMART goals, like in your job, in your career, but setting those personally can be hugely advantageous, not only as it relates to what we're talking about in physical movement, but also in your health and planning meals, planning macronutrients, all of those things that can seem daunting. But if you can sort of take them off in bite-sized pieces and not feel like you have to accomplish the world right away, and just make some actionable things that you can do now, I think is a hugely beneficial and excellent advice for anybody who's sort of hit that plateau, kind of stalled out, and feels like they're going to have to do something dramatic, or go back to diet culture, get out the prepackaged food, do all those tired things that you used to have to do. I think these medications really are the gift. The gift of them is they're correcting some metabolic issues, underlying hormonal issues that were always working against you. So you shouldn't have to, revert to that. Small changes should be helpful for most people. Let's talk a little bit. The other thing that you mentioned were labs, and kind of taking a look at your total overall health and what's going on maybe under the hood a little bit. What role do you think that labs play in the overall health journey with GLP-1s, and what should people be looking for?
Yeah, there are a handful of things. First would be if any side effects do arise. Sometimes labs can be helpful in those situations. For example, early on, we know that GI side effects are really common, and if you're not eating very much because of the effect of the medication, and if you do start to have nausea and vomiting, some people are at risk for dehydration. And so some labs come into play because we might look at kidney function and signs of dehydration and see if there's any stress on the body there. Pancreatitis is listed as a rare side effect. Meta-analyses don't really show that it occurs very much with GLP-1s. But let's say through that process of having GI side effects, you start to have severe, what we call mid-epigastric, sort of right underneath the breastbone, abdominal pain, and some vomiting comes radiates back to your back, then labs may come in there to look for something like pancreatitis or stress on the liver. So labs certainly come in those episodic moments when side effects may come up. But as time goes on, labs can play other roles. So you can look at tracking essentially achievement, seeing how your health is improving over time. Many folks will have elevated hemoglobin A1, which is the marker of how well your body responds to insulin. And so we know that as you lose weight, and especially with GLP-1 therapy in particular, because GLP-1s were originally approved to treat diabetes, we know that they impact insulin sensitivity. And so it's not uncommon to see that hemoglobin A1C comes down towards normal levels. We know that there are improvements in cholesterol, liver enzymes. ALT is one of the two common liver enzymes that is assessed routinely, and semaglutide, we know that over the course of a year can bring it down an average of about 14 points, which is pretty significant. So you can start to see that there are improvements in the collection of biomarkers that often start to go awry as our bodies accumulate weight. So you can look at that essentially as a way to mark achievement, right? To take some pride in what you've accomplished throughout the journey. But another reason to look at some of those is also that there may have to be adjustments in any medications you might be on. So if your hemoglobin A1C comes down, and if you are on medications for diabetes, your provider may have to shift the dosage of those medications. We know that thyroid, or TSH, it's a thyroid-related hormone that is measured in folks often with hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. And if you are on medication for, say, hypothyroidism, um, hypothyroidism often improves with GLP-1 treatment, with weight loss in particular. And so your provider may need to be checking your TSH to then make shifts in your thyroid medication. Some medications that are taken by mouth, because GLP-1s slow down how quickly the gut empties, certain medications like blood thinners may be absorbed differently by your body when you are
Birth
taking a
control.
GLP-1. Birth control as well, absolutely. And so with something like a blood thinner, there are lab markers that you can check. Birth control, we won't be checking labs, but yeah, extra considerations to take there.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that you kind of touched on was sort of marking your progress is a great thing that labs can help you do. And especially when you talk about shifting the mindset, when you're somebody who is dealing with stalls or plateaus, we get so myopically focused on a scale number and we lose sight of the fact that it's a health journey, not a weight journey. Weight is just one metric, right? But if you are finding yourself discouraged because the scale hasn't moved maybe as fast as you can, as you wanted it to, or as fast as it is for somebody else, but then you can look at those things like a reduction in HbA1c, a reduction in bad cholesterol. You can look at maybe a lower blood pressure, less inflammation, all of these things that labs can help sort of put a metric to. That might help shift your mindset too, and help from a mindset standpoint of re-engaging you in that journey, because oftentimes people get so discouraged that the tendency is to disengage, right? And then put everything on autopilot. So I think that's all really great information as far as labs are concerned. Dr. Steve, you've been very generous with your time today. I'm just curious, given your experience with GLP-1s, given all of the background you have with obesity medicine, what is maybe one thing that you would say to somebody who is watching this journey or watching this show, who's on a health journey, and they look at it and they just say, I don't know if these medications are right for me because I've heard of these terrible side effects, or I've heard of whatever it may be, the FUD that sort of comes from the media, right? So if you're that person, you're struggling metabolically, you're struggling with obesity, and you're sort of on the fence on whether to try these, what would you say to that person?
So I would say, speak to a healthcare provider, get information from reliable, great sources. You've done an excellent job with this podcast, making sure that the right information is going out and helpful information is going out. But yeah, talk with a provider who knows these medications in depth. I think that when it comes to side effects in particular, they are a real thing. I don't think there's any reason to sugarcoat it. They are a real thing. They are part of the experience for many, many people. But what a provider who knows how to use these medications should be able to tell you is that those side effects often improve over time. There are a whole lot of ways that we can help you navigate them and manage them, so that you can get to that point where those side effects have started to resolve and your body has gotten used to medication, and you can then really start to enjoy the benefits of the medication over time. I think that's something that is one thing that we are often really trying to combat, is taking the realistic approach that, yes, like there are side effects. We don't want to give the impression that it's a really simple experience for every single person who takes the medication. But at the same time, proper use of the medication and proper support as you're taking the medication can help with those. So for example, there was an article in the Washington Post a couple of years ago about gastroparesis, slowing down of the gut. And one of the people that they tracked and told the story of throughout this article, about 3/4 of the way through the article, shared that they had changed from semaglutide to tirzepatide because of the Wegovy shortage at the time. And they were on the highest dose of Wegovy and were switched over to the highest dose of Zepbound.
Mm.
They're not equivalent, right? The highest dose of Zepbound is a lot stronger than the highest dose of Wegovy. And so I read that and got 3/4 of the way through the article and said, oh, well, goodness gracious, like this is probably why you had such a high degree of this side effect. And so I think that the really important thing is to make sure that you are asking questions of, and if you pursue treatment, then getting treatment from providers who are really confident and experienced in these medications and helping people through all the challenges that may experience, so you can get to the place where you can finally fully enjoy all the benefits of your care.
Amazing. Such great advice. Dr. Steve, where can people find you if they want to follow your content online?
Well, so you can find me on our Row Instagram handle.
Okay.
You can also find us if you are a patient being treated as a member of Row and be treated by providers who use the Row platform. Then I make a lot of the material that you'll see as a patient, whether it's instructional material or helping you through some side effects or just general education about tips and tricks and things that you can do to get the most out of your care.
I love it. Yeah. It's really the Row app. I can't understand it. People are always like, what's the differentiator with Row? And I'm like, well, for starters, the technology is just so good. And the Row app is a tremendous resource. And there are several really, really great doctors on there like yourself. I think of Dr. Beverly Chang. There's some really great obesity physicians and they're giving great information. So that's really great. If you're a Row patient, definitely take advantage of those resources. Dr. Steve, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you lending some of it to the community here. And hopefully we'll get the chance to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Dave.
My pleasure. Dr. Steve, that was a great conversation. Dr. Steve Silvestro, just a wealth of information. Again, follow along on the Row platforms. There's a lot of content from Dr. Steve there. And as he mentioned, the Row app, full of great resources as well for those of you who are rowers, right? So thank you again to Dr. Steve for being here today at On the Pen. Dr. Steve, I hope you all enjoyed that conversation. So much to unpack there, but really appreciate Dr. Steve and Row for helping us connect Dr. Steve with OTP and bring you just some excellent information. Just a wealth of knowledge is Dr. Steve. Make sure you check him out over on the Row Instagram page. And then if you are a Row Body member, you'll have access to all of his content on the Row app. Thank you, Row, for providing that connection. And thank you, Dr. Steve, for your valuable time and insights to OTP. I hope you all have a great week. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're listening to the podcast, consider giving it a 5-star rating and review. That always helps other people get in touch with this information. That's what it's all about, helping more people. Now, for the rest of the week, my prayer and my hope for you is that the Lord would bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and be so very gracious to each and every one of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. Now go and train that algorithm. Hit that thumbs up.